This is the Fit for Fortune podcast. I'm your host, David Mirza, and today I'm welcoming Angus Bradley, who is the reason this podcast even exists. He's one of my mentors. He's the one that got me out of 2 years of insane neck and back pain. I'm not sure if he even knows that. He's an all-around amazing guy and has some interesting thoughts and concepts on movements and not training like a bodybuilder, not making unathletic meatheads out of people that work a regular 9-to-5 desk job. In today's episode, I'm hoping to talk about his ideas on what he calls general physical preparation. What does general physical preparation mean to you?
Well, do you want me to speak about it purely as a training thing or from like a company values perspective? Because I finally got the whole company mission thing down pat, and I feel like that's the best summary of it.
More like the training thing.
More just the training thing? Okay, yeah. I really fell in love with strength training first and foremost, or other than just all the sports I sort of played growing up, but as far as my own sort of training. And really got into my Olympic weightlifting because I was a personal trainer, but I didn't really gel with the whole bodybuilding thing. I was a little bit of a hard gainer. Strength came a little bit more naturally to me, so I sort of lent into that and pursued that a little bit harder. And I got like really serious about it and really passionate about it. And that gave my life so much, like just having a real passion for strength training as a young adult and sort of moving into proper adulthood. But then it sort of started to manifest negatively in just a couple of ways that just soured it a little bit. Like, again, being a hard gainer. So like I wasn't all in on gaining muscle, but like if you want to clean and jerk and snatch bigger weights, you should probably be making sure that your body weight goes up over time. And there was just a few times where I was a very average weightlifter where my girlfriend on the weekend would be like, let's go for a walk to the markets or something. And I'd be like, nah, like, cardio, too much calories. Like I just want to like sit here eating and trying to put on weight. Or even just I would hesitate before just engaging in like a touch football game with my mates on the weekend because I thought I was more athletic than ever, but I was just like, oh man, if I blew my knee out like trying to cut past my mate versus like, I don't really care if I blow my knee out weightlifting because, I've signed up for that risk. That's what I'm sort of there to do. Anyway, so when gyms shut down around 2020, I absolutely spat the dummy with weightlifting because all of a sudden I really couldn't train it anymore. And I went back to one of my old passions, which was surfing. And yeah, and when I got back into that, I was like, oh my God, like I was just sort of missing out on so much. But then, like, I didn't cast aside weightlifting. I just sort of expanded my training horizons a little bit. And, like, yes, I was less dedicated to weightlifting, but I was like, oh, I'm still sort of able to make progress in this area. And so it sort of just led down this rabbit hole. And it connected back to some other memories as well of just, like, being at my old weightlifting gym, been doing weightlifting for a couple of years, thinking I'm pretty technical and stuff. And then a football player who's just quit playing football will come in and power clean my max on day one. And I was like, do I need more specific weightlifting training or do I just need general qualities? You know what I mean? Could I have just been out trying to be the best rugby player, training, doing S&C like that? And would that have turned me into just as much of a beast? And then I just kept pulling on that thread. Like, what is this whole, I sort of called it like training variously or general physical preparation. And I guess it sort of emerged as two sort of main threads. I've sort of built the brand or the ethos around like the impact we're trying to have because I'm very passionate about training the general population. But then I also like working with athletes and people who are, into playing sport and things like that. And so from a general population perspective, I think we have an industry where people talk so much about how it's not just about how you look, yet we have an industry that's just really geared to that. Like, and I'm not here to bash bodybuilding either, like, because I think it's given so much to so many people, but the same way that every other physical pursuit in the gym can have just as much value as everyone. And I think bodybuilding is seen as this thing that everyone wants. But I mean, I know you do so many consults with the general public and they will always sort of say things like, oh, no, it's not just about how, I don't want to get too big. I don't want to be like a bodybuilder. So many of them will point to like a swimmer or a tennis player, and they're like, man, if I could look like this like fucking Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, like that would be amazing. It's like, mate, you can actually play a sport and I can assist you with that. So I would love for general population personal trainers to have the skill set of a strength and conditioning coach. Like if someone comes to you and be like, I want to get diced and I want bigger arms, you're like, I can do that exactly for you. Not like, no, we have to do plyos instead. But just being able to offer them the fitness experience that they genuinely want. And I just think the same way that CrossFit could be this awesome gateway drug into fitness, like strength and conditioning and just all the things that make up physical activity can be potentially awesome sources of training, awesome sources of goals, and we can sort of combine them all together whatever way we want and truly make it a journey that's unique to us. Because I would say that the best results that we get as personal trainers, it's not like the advanced methods or like being that much better than any other trainer. Like, yes, that's a part of it, but ultimately it's just about encouraging someone to participate for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. Like, that's the big results. And I'm getting pretty utopian with this, but that is sort of what I'm banking on. Like, can I expose this person to the smorgasbord of physical preparation just so they can connect with some part of it? And maybe it's not even a part of the training. Maybe it's a part of the training that facilitates a father playing touch footy with his son who's getting towards the end of high school. He's like, oh man, like, should I be playing touch footy? But his physical preparation allows him to do that. I mean, look at LeBron playing with his kid. I mean, that's more than S&C. That's God-given talent. But then also lucky enough to do a little bit of work in strength and conditioning and in professional sports and things like that. And I think that our understanding of what a human is and just what stress is and what we're doing with this whole training and physical preparation thing has changed and shifted around a lot over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on how much you're zooming out. And we have so many coaches in their silos being like, I'm a basketball S&C coach. And then other people being like, I'm a bodybuilder, or I just work with people doing strength sports. And all of you are dealing with humans first and foremost. Most have got 2 arms, 2 legs, you know what I mean? And yes, their specific sport does add a certain amount of specificity to it in terms of the demands, but we just overestimate it. And we could be having so much more productive conversations if we just sort of got together as an industry more and be like, what the fuck is a human? What the hell is stress? What the hell is just like training in general? And just having more broader conversations, I think.
As a side note, have you ever realized that people that have 2 arms actually have more than the average number of arms?
Oh, because the average number of arms is like 1.99. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Man, you're pulling that very early in the morning. My brain was going. I was like the X-Files meme.
It's the morning for you. So what are the different categories of qualities that you are looking to train?
At the top of it, like, I think people really overdo it with the physical qualities. Like, I don't even believe in like power, or like often you'll hear things like speed, strength, muscular endurance. So I sort of broadly the physical qualities, there's endurance, how long can you do something for a certain given work rate. There's speed, how fast you can do something. There's strength, you know, how strong, how much force can you put into something. It sort of overlaps with the whole hypertrophy thing, but as a physical quality, it's sort of more just strength. And then there's like mobility, flexibility. Outside of that, that sort of covers all of that. But then what that looks like in terms of the training that I'm encouraging people to participate in, I love strength and hypertrophy. I love high speed running. I think there's a real hybrid movement right now in fitness. And I love this idea of combining endurance training and lifting weights. I love it when people throw a bit of sprinting into the mix, or even some plyometrics as well. I love gymnastics. I would say if I had to summarize my approach to strength training, what I end up doing with a lot of my clients, it's like a lot of their primaries and their compounds would be sort of look like powerlifting training, but then with their accessories, a lot of it tends to look like either bodybuilding where convenient, or maybe gymnastics training, because again, you can get a great strength or muscle building stimulus, but there's a skill component. It's really fun. And they're almost diametrically opposed, the shapes that gymnastics training encourages and the postures that are really effective versus then in like powerlifting with a barbell. So that combination of powerlifting style training and gymnastics style strength training is so good, in my opinion, just because forces people to be strong everywhere.
What do you base your gymnastics sort of progressions on? Do you utilize stuff like Coach Summers' gymnastic bodies and stuff?
Honestly, like I get so many DMs about how wrong I do gymnastics, and I love it because I'm like, man, I'm getting so much out of this. Because same as like weightlifting, people are like, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. I think it's just about getting better over time. So I just get in and have a crack. I mean, some of the end progressions, I've had to talk to people. Shout out to Anna Wish Fitness. She's very good with the gymnastics. She's sort of gymnastics and CrossFit sort of person. And she's helped me with a few of the progressions and things like that. because it can be hard to imagine, like, what is the pathway to like those crazy front levers and the planches and things like that. But then once you've seen a few of them, break them down, you're like, oh, right, it's really just about using anything to make the movement easier, whether it's resting yourself on a set of blocks instead of having to hold yourself, or suspending yourself with a bit of band tension. So usually just comes down to things like that. But yes, like so much of it is just all built off that hollow position and then trying to become more competent doing different activities, maintaining that position.
So let's say if you have a jump up client that has limited time to allocate to all these different qualities, let's say they have like 4 to 5 hours per week maximum. How much of it would you distribute to weight training versus cardio versus higher intensity cardio, gymnastics, plyos?
I love this whole conversation about minimum effective dose. Not to be confused with like bare minimum, but it's like, what's the minimum dose where I can make some sort of meaningful or measurable progress over time? Yeah, I really love zooming in on that. One, because you recognize this, like so many people talk about optimal programming, but it's with complete ignorance to the constraints that so many of our clients face. And then I would say when you're encouraging people to train multiple qualities, you've got to be even more on top of your minimum effective dose, because when you can't control your dose of training and you're trying to train multiple qualities, then you'll start saying dumb things like, oh, it was the interference effect. And it's like, no, you just had this person doing so much total training in pursuit of all these physical qualities. You really need to be strict about that minimum effective dose. And with strength and hypertrophy, I don't like saying I'm certain about anything, but I'd say we have a lot more evidence that the minimum effective dose for some people is extraordinarily low. And I think a lot of people, when they hear it, they might not believe it either. But then I think it's about having a bit of a nuanced conversation about it. So to cut to the chase, apparently you can get stronger just with one hard set per week on, for example, whether it's deadlift, whether it's squat, whether it's bench press. And again, even when I hear that evidence, I think that it would probably change a little bit lift to lift, because it's different qualities and levels of skill and constraints and fatigue associated with each of them. But that's what the evidence says. And in my experience, it sort of matches up with what I've seen. It's not saying that everyone will be able to get stronger just doing one set a week, but that it's possible and that it's worth experimenting with, because it's very easy to add a set, like, and that's again, even more reason why I go around like minimum effective dose, because can't put the toothpaste back into the tube, or you can't put the tendinopathy back into the tube. So I would always rather, like I said, it's so easy just to add volume when you do a minimum effective dose. And with hypertrophy, it seems to be a bit higher, but I mean, 3, 4, 5 good quality, hard working sets per week. And I think if there's anyone listening to this, you're like, what do you mean? Like, especially if you are quite muscular and you've had a bit of a strength and a hypertrophy journey, you're like, man, just some of the workouts I've done just to grow my legs a little bit. Are you really telling me I could do such few sets a week? And I think what is being said there and highlighted by the evidence is that a lot of people really struggle to maintain a high quality of training. People talk about having TikTok brain and stuff like that, and then they program themselves 8 sub-max sets of RDLs. And I'm like, how switched on are you for all of those? A personal trainer, let alone a corporate with, all the things their boss said to them, all the things their wife or spouse said to them that day floating around in the back of their head, or thinking about picking their kid up from soccer practice. I'm like, man, like there's so many reasons why I just like 2 hard sets of things. But then again, typically with the dosage, typically getting 2 exposures to that a week. So looking at 4 hard, high quality work sets per week. And like I said, for me, it's never just considered strength or hypertrophy. It's always sort of done as both. And when you're training multiple qualities, I think a lot of the time your strength and hypertrophy work, you've sort of almost got to look at it as the same thing.
Yeah, I think the whole industry, especially jump up people, just want to do a lot of work, but not a lot of quality work. And especially for busy people, the goal should be doing few hard quality sets.
Yeah. Trainers don't pride themselves enough on flexibility and making it work for the client. I think there's this ego thing where you want clients to submit to you and you want to come up sometimes with these diabolical plans, or as young coaches, But yeah, when you just put the ego aside and you're really just like, how conveniently can I get this person shredded or stronger or more jacked or just healthier? Again, that's how you get them to do it for life. it's all well and good getting Sally shredded in 6 weeks, but then when she never signs up with a PT again, and when her blowout is like sends her back further back than where she started from, versus someone you take him under your wing, you just get him a little bit better every single week. You know what I mean? It's just it's night and day in my opinion.
So when it comes to training variously or general physical preparation, half of the answer is not allocating all your working load to strength and hypertrophy. So now that we have all that time that freed up, how do we distribute the rest of the qualities in there?
I think the biggest thing that is going to blow out and take up time is your conditioning and your endurance. And obviously a big part of how much we focus on that in our training split comes down to someone's individual goals. And this is the thing, I encourage people to train more variously. And I just don't want people to feel like they have to train one thing and like it is possible to train multiple things. But yeah, and especially because I like a polarized approach to my conditioning or building the engine and endurance training. Like, yeah, the high intensity side of it, it's really easy to fit that in. Obviously, you have to recover from it, but the actual session is relatively short. But I'm a big fan of, and this is something I've changed my recommendations on. I used to be a massive advocate for zone 2 for the lower end of our polarized conditioning. And again, I still like very low intensity aerobic work because I think so many people's idea of cardio is just absolutely wrecking themselves in a minute. And then people wonder why they never get anywhere. I'm like, no, we're trying to work on our ability to do things for a long time. So we need to find an intensity that we can sustain for a long time. Like, so few people have an idea of what a sustainable intensity feels like for them. So again, still a massive advocate of low intensity aerobic work. And because again, the big sell of it was there's barely any recovery demands associated with it. And it's still a great engine building stimulus. The thing is, you do have to sit on a bike or whatever for multiple hours per week. And again, we just sort of discussed, it's like if you have 3, 4, 5 hours to dedicate to training per week, I mean, and this is where we start to have a chat about, can we get you sitting on the bike at home? Like, do you have time where you're reading resources for work or something like that, where you're just watching Netflix and you could be sitting on the bike watching some Netflix and it's not from that gym time allocation necessarily. But practically now I end up recommending more zone 3 work for a lot of people for the lower end of their polarized conditioning work, just because it'll get the job done a little bit quicker. You just have to be a bit more mindful of the dose. But again, a lot of people are so constrained, they're just sort of fitting it in anyway. And for anyone who's listening, they're like, what the hell is zone 2 or zone 3? Don't worry about it too much because I shouldn't say I go off vibes. I don't use like a heart rate monitor or anything like that. A lot of mine is just like, how hard do I perceive my exertion to be? And again, I'll be looking at my times, how much distance I'm covering and trying to get in some objective data. But again, my zone 2 test isn't 65 to 70% a heart rate. It's, can I call my mate and have a little bit of a catch up without sounding too out of breath? That's my zone 2. And yeah, just sort of using more of an RPE based approach to it.
So how do you define zone 3?
Another 10% higher.
Okay.
And then so zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and zone 5 is you're dying. You can't do it for very long. I feel like you're having a heart attack. Sorry, it's not actually that, but close.
Returning to the idea of minimum effective dose, an idea of yours that I really love is just microdosing qualities and microdosing movements in training. How do you define micro, and how can you tell if micro is too micro or not micro enough?
Yeah, it's funny because like I think in your head, right, when you go macro to then micro, we're thinking like very, very small, but then it's like, well, 1 set a week is kind of our minimum. And then I say it's a minimum dose of strength training. I don't say I'm micro dosing strength training. I guess they're all doing because of the exposures and stuff like that. It's a bit more than 1 set a week. But yeah, that's what it is to me, or that's a starting point. I think about programming a lot in like economic terms because it is just resource management at the end of the day. And then we have so much evidence that there's parallels, right? Like diminishing returns per amount of quality sets and things like that, especially for strength and hypertrophy training. But yeah, I'm really just a fan of throwing in a set of something. And it might not do anything, but it might do something. And that's cool because, and again, like that one quality set, like that is potentially going to net us some of our biggest impact. and that's all you have to do. And if you and we're trying to not disrupt the program. It's like, oh, I've got a great hybrid program going on, and I want to dose in some other quality. Like if you're getting great results with that, it's moving you towards your primary goals. You don't want to mess with things too much, so you don't want to throw in a bigger dose of something. So it really just is about just salt baying in little things. And I think as well, for novelty, like people talk about entertainment. Like we don't work with pro athletes. Sometimes it is just nice to give your client a new exercise just for the sake of giving your client a new exercise. And I think a lot of the time we trivialize that, but I'm like, nah, man, like that's the most awesome shit. When someone gives you a new move or a new exercise to try and you're like, holy, like, fuck, like I just got such a good pump from that, or whatever it was. And you never get those opportunities. And sometimes it's because you've just experimented with a new exercise that was the right fit for you. Sometimes it is that novelty, like the novelty is exciting to the system. And again, it's a great way to get people re-engaged with their programming. Like, have you ever got to the point with your coach where like he's got you on a good program, so he kind of is just hitting Control C, Control V because he's like, man, like this is awesome. And you're at the point where you don't even open your program before you start the workout. You're like, I'll just do the workout that I know is going to be there, and then I'll log it. It can even just keep him engaged for stuff like that. Be like, oh, nah, Dave's might have had a little treat in there for me or an Easter egg. And again, I think a lot of the times we trivialize this idea of entertainment, but yeah, it's just, there's something to it. There's something to almost everything in this field, isn't there?
Entertainment. I like that word.
It's really nice to play around with, and it allows you as a coach to feel creative and like a bit of an artist. And I think that that's something that's quite important as well. I speak to a lot of good coaches who get bored with their programming because they're like, yeah, I'm pretty dialed in with it. And like, I want to be creative, but then I don't want to be just programming my clients bullshit. And I always tell them, like, play around with some microdosing because it allows you to feel creative and like an artist. But then, the bulk of your programming is pretty straightforward.
And clients always love the microdosing stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you strike a balance between consistency and variety in programming? So consistent enough that adaptations can take place, but varied enough that we can incorporate different qualities and patterns?
Awesome question. One of my favorite topics. I completely agree that you need a consistent stimulus so you can make adaptations in a given direction. I don't know what the end boundaries of something that we can consider a consistent stimulus. Like, no one would say that you're not getting a consistent stimulus if I have you doing high bar back squats 4x8 with 2 reps in reserve. And then the next week you go 1 rep in reserve. And then the next week you go 0 reps in reserve. We still consider that a consistent stimulus. That is, it's like we're trying to get bigger legs, bigger lower body, bigger, stronger lower body here. Intensity that the evidence sort of shows us is high enough for building strength and hypertrophy. But then what if after 3 weeks of that, I go to a hack squat for 1 week, still bending my ankles, knees and hips. I keep the RIR the same. I keep the sets and reps the same. Hip flexion angle might be different. Knee flexion angle might be different. How different? How much does that disrupt the stimulus? And I'm not saying that it's the exact same. And I think depending on how you program for people, like, because people will talk about like this neurological learning phase when you do a new exercise. But if you're always sort of training variously, if you've been around the gym for a few years, you shouldn't have to like learn how to hack squat every time you hop on the thing. I look at, for a consistent stimulus, what I've sort of fallen to is target tissue, proximity to failure. And I know that there's more to the stimulus than that, but I think that's like the big rocks of it. And like that's it. If you're going like fully lengthened bias to then like fully shortened bias in a different movement, I'm like, okay, maybe we're getting to something where, and again, it's more just based off vibes and feels, not any hard evidence or experience. I'm like, maybe this feels like we're getting towards something that is not a truly different stimulus, but different enough so that we're like, there's some disruption in the consistency and rate of adaptation. But yeah, I think a lot of coaches have sort of just taken that statement, consistent stimulus at face value, and never been like, how consistent exactly? Because we know it's not like ultimate precision. So then what is it?
So in your opinion, the same tissue taken close to failure is enough. It doesn't need to be at the same length. It doesn't need to be with the same movement pattern.
Yeah. mostly movement pattern, target tissues, proximity to failure. I think that's the most of it, you know? And this is, I'm not going to war over this, but I've never had anyone be like, but blah, and just point out something that I'm missing from that yet. That's why I like to bring it up with people. I'm like, am I missing something here?
And the other side of this is this whole week thing is equally arbitrary. Like squatting 7 days apart is consistent, but what about 6 days? What about 8 days?
Yeah. And I love when this conversation comes up because it's so true. One thing I will say is I have done an A-B micro, so a 2-week micro cycle, but I have never successfully deviated from a 7-day or 14 micro structure because you're right. As much as like there's no reason for doing that, it's just the way society sort of structured. It's like most people sort of do fall into that 7-day routine. Having said that, I've never trained a fly-in, fly-out worker who's on a 10-day work roster because I'm like, oh my God, like that could be a really amazing application of breaking out of a 7-day microstructure. But practically...
I'm sorry, what's a fly-in, fly-out?
So in the mines in Western Australia, where they're pulling valuable rocks out of the ground, a lot of them are on a 10-day roster. So they'll fly out into the desert, get paid massive money, and then they'll fly down to Perth and they'll, you know, have 10 days off.
And they work 10 days and they have 10 days off after.
Yeah, and they're getting paid. So it's sort of in Perth, Western Australia, and there's other parts of Australia, but it's quite a stereotypical form of employment over in Western Australia. They're sort of the cashed up bogans. It's just like, you know, don't need a uni degree. You just fucking got to be able to drive a truck and dig a hole and you can get paid good, man. But the thing is, like, they're all in the desert. Like, you're away from your family, so maybe you gamble all the extra money that you like. It's a funny sort of, it's a funny joint.
Interesting. Programming for them could be interesting as well.
Oh, hell yeah.
And then the last thing I would add to this whole variety question is a lot of the time when people talk about neuromuscular adaptations, they act as if you change something and it's only the neuro adaptation that takes place. Like you suddenly don't make any progress in strength and muscle gain. It's just neurological adaptations only.
Yeah. I mean, you have a look at Olympic weightlifters. So many of those Bulgarians developed heavily muscled physiques doing singles and doubles and things that we would typically associate with neurological adaptations. It's like, I think this is a brilliant lesson to just apply to everything. Like we are taught so many things in a black and white way in this industry. And it's because discussing things with nuance can get overwhelming. Like when you're trying to introduce someone to fitness and they're like, all right, so how do you get a muscle bigger? And you're like, well, generally speaking, higher reps. And then if they're like, wait, so you can't build muscle with low reps? It's like, they fucking can, but it's like probably too early for them to let them know. It's like, oh, fuck, like, because then it ends up being a really long conversation. But there are so many things like that. So like you said, like we associate more neuro adaptations with the lower rep range, but it's not just. And it's the same way that we make neurological adaptations with sets of 10, 12 plus as well. The same way with energy systems. People are like, oh, I'm just using this one energy system. Your energy systems, we don't like alternate perfectly like a car where we're like switching from this fuel and then I'll switch over to this fuel tank. We sort of bias energy systems up and down, like turn them up and down like dials, but they're to an extent always running concurrently over the top of one another, which is, again, going back to why do people believe in the interference effect? Because, again, simply when you were introduced to a lot of these ideas, you're like, yeah, it's like different activities, different activity durations and intensities are associated with different energy systems. But again, sort of people are like, oh, it's just that one energy system. It's like, no, there's a little bit more to it than that, but again, takes so long to explain all this stuff.
So we talked about allocating strength and hypertrophy work. We talked about some cardio stuff. I'm not going to ask you about Plyos because I'm hoping you will put me in touch with Mackinnis Watson and I can ask him. But for the average gym goer, a big question mark remains here, which would be mobility training. How do you think about training for mobility?
I think flexibility and mobility training has been unnecessary. Can we swear on this podcast? I know I've already sworn a couple of times.
You're Australian. You have a license to.
I think flexibility and mobility And a lot of people get caught up in the differences between those words. I know there's a difference to them. I just want to be able to move my body through more range of motion, whether that's mobility or flexibility. I don't give a fuck. But I think it's definitely the bastard child. That probably and aerobic work is always shit on in the evidence-based era. Everyone's like, isn't strength training so good? I mean, strength training is even better for developing fitness than cardio. Strength training is even better for mobility and flexibility than stretching. I'm like, fuck, is it? Like, you know, that's pretty bold statements there. The honest truth, I think most people end up getting more mobile when they lift weights through a full range of motion, like deep squats, overhead pressing, full range of motion hinging, frontal plane work to open up the hips, shifting side to side in your body. All of those things, especially if you're dealing with someone who is relatively sedentary, it's going to be better than sending them to yoga classes and things like that. Having said that, like, if you want to get really strong, you got to do strength training. You know, the same way that yoga and Pilates does improve your strength, but like not fucking really. It's like you should probably just like sling some iron. And I think if you are serious about wanting to get more flexible, you should actually do some dedicated flexibility work and you should put some effort in there, because I think a lot of people, they shit on static stretching. They're like, it's not that effective. I think the way people do it, like a lot of people just do it like an afterthought. Whereas if you apply some intensity to it, you can make insane flexibility gains. So again, practically, do I end up doing a lot of mobility work with people? No. But I think it gets unfairly shit on, like just flexibility training, static stretching. Even people try to like scare you off. They're like, oh, it's going to make you weaker. It's like, no, it's not. It's going to stop your muscles from contracting as quick. You're going to lose peak power. I mean, didn't you see all the Olympic athletes? You have a look at them before the 100-meter final of the Olympics. They're all stretching. Like, it doesn't make a difference.
Interesting. I'm one of the people actually shitting on stretching, especially passive stretching.
Well, no, but I'll meet. So it depends who you're talking to, because when I was growing up, every single sports activity in primary school and high school, we had to stretch before and after it so we didn't apparently injure ourselves. So I think that it's this swinging pendulum where people are like, oh, well, if you lift weights and you don't stretch, you're going to get really stiff. So we sort of went from a fitness meta where people were told you have to stretch. There was an overemphasis on it due to incorrect beliefs about strength training and how injuries occur and things like that. And then we were like, oh, right, so you don't need to stretch before and after you work out. And it almost got thrown in the bin to the point where it's like, oh, God, why would you ever stretch? That's just fucking stupid. So sort of just trying to bring it back into the middle ground. But I 100% agree with you. The average person probably thinks that stretching is more important than it is. The average personal trainer probably thinks that there's way less value in stretching or traditional flexibility work than what there realistically is, because it is just another form of loaded stretching or isometric strength training at the end of the day. Like, I see where you're coming from.
What about stretching a muscle because it's tight versus strengthening it because it's tight because it's weak?
Yeah. Like, the perception of tightness is such an interesting one. And I mean, muscles can feel tight because they're short. Muscles can feel tight because they're long. So I think it's a really tricky conversation with either of those being like, oh, if we just get this muscle longer, it'll feel less tight. If we just get this muscle stronger, it'll feel less tight. Because I have experienced stretching it and getting relief, and I've experienced strengthening and getting relief. But then I've also had girlfriends that could put their legs behind their head and they're like, no, my hammies still feel tight. I'm like, all right. So like, yeah, there's this perception of time. Like, and again, maybe it's just the passive tension that they're experiencing, or it could be some sort of psychological thing. And then I'm also a big believer that strength through length and strength can just relieve a muscle. Maybe it gives it a bit more variability or something like that, so it's not just chronically stuck in that one position. But then, like, powerlifters always complaining about a tight back. So it is one of those things where I think just often people are just replacing one sensation with another. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think if you sort of just look at it as that, like, I'm sick of this part of my body feeling in this state. So I'm just going to put it in a different position, or I'm going to make it behave in a new way. And just that different sensation will make me feel better.
For the average listener that goes to the gym tonight, what would be some immediately actionable steps for them to take in order to train more variously or in order to be generally more physically prepared?
Say you've been lifting weights for a couple of years and you're on top of your training, but yeah, you're ready to take this GPP pill. So what does that look like? Before you hit the weights, say, are we doing a full body resistance training or is it upper or lower? So whatever it is, we'll talk about both of those contexts. I mean, get into some jumping. When was the last time you left the ground? And if you're listening and you're like, couldn't tell you, let's try to do it in the easiest, safest and most scalable way. And that is leaping. So when Dave gets Matt Watson on the show, he'll explain this whole system that we use for categorizing plyometrics. But leaping is the most simple and versatile and most scalable form of plyometric or jumping training. And it's just jumping up and down on two legs. And how hard should you do it? How many reps should you do? I honestly couldn't tell you. I just want you to go in and mess about with it. But I want you to be conscious and I want you to start light. If you haven't left the ground in recent memory, I want you to try to see how little you can leave the ground. Again, actually leaving the ground, jumping higher than you did last week, which wasn't at all. But if you're leaving the ground by a centimeter, then you're jumping way higher than you were last week. Because again, I think a lot of the reason why there's hesitance around getting into plyometric training, it's like, oh, well, that's going to be really hard on my body, right? But it's like, yeah, but like, isn't that why strength training makes you resilient? Because it's a bit of stress to the system. You just got to find the right dose. And so the thing with like a lot of forms of training is that it's so easy to go too hard too early. Whereas the one thing that's sort of good about resistance training is you'd have to be pretty obtuse to have never squatted before and be like, well, I'll just put 200 kilos on and then go on, like just saying catastrophic happens. With jumping, I guess there can be that opportunity because you're like, oh my God, I'll crawl up this box and then leap down off it. So that's why just jumping on the flat ground on two legs is such a scalable, safe way to get into it. So test it out, do a couple of reps. Just do a couple of sets till you sort of feel bouncy and warmed up. So your body temperature's increased, your heart rate's come up a little bit and you're like, all right, it's time for my first strength training exercise. Another great thing you could do is pick a gymnastics skill. Whether it's like, it might not be a full-blown ring muscle up or anything like that, but whether it's just holding a hollow hold or something like that. Like if you've never done gymnastics and you've done a lot of traditional strength training, I guarantee you there's some positions that you are so weak in because you've just never done resistance training in them, and gymnastics training is going to find them and highlight them like an absolute laser beam. So a little bit of plyometrics, and not only is that jump training, it's also a little bit of speed and power training because you're probably going to move a little bit quicker there as well. So again, maybe you want to try to learn an Olympic lift and you're like, wait, I don't know how to program the Olympic lifts. Use it as your warm up. So I think the warm up and the cool down aspect, either side of your strength training, is so good for toying around with this, training variously or introducing new training ideas and seeing how your body responds to it. So I'm a massive fan of doing those sorts of things. And even just with approaching and sprinkling those three things into your training, the start of such deep rabbit holes, because at a certain point you're going to be like, wait, am I ready to jump on one leg or bounce between either leg? And then like, what are all those variations like? And like, oh, maybe I can only do like light jumps on one leg, but now when I'm on two legs, I can actually bounce up and down pretty good like a bunny. I might try to do a couple more sets than I did last week. So it's just about you find these threads and you just keep pulling on them and you see where they go. And then you start to realize that all these different forms of training, they don't really interfere with each other. It's more complementary, especially like I said, when you know what your intention is for the session, and then you're just adding in a few other things that don't necessarily have to take away from that and can very much enhance it. And you might find a new passion for training that you never would have known existed. And even with that Olympic lifts, they can seem really complex. Well, maybe for your strength sets, so your strength and hypertrophy, dedicate a few of those to power development and be like, all right, I don't know how to teach myself a snatch or a clean and jerk, but I'm just going to do some squats at about 50% of my normal weight. I'm just going to try to move the bar a bit faster. Because again, training more variously isn't about doing any one thing in particular. It's about pushing your own envelope. And it's like, you don't have to go down to the track and sprint. I just want you moving faster in some way. Like I would love for everyone to head down the track and sprint. But yeah, just trying to think about what's accessible and within reach of everyone. And I think those are some great ideas to begin with.
Thank you. What about the risk-reward ratio of Olympic lifts?
Yeah, I will speak about Olympic lifts a little bit, but I want to make this point about all forms of resistance training, all forms of training. Sport is what is risky. There is so much injury incidents in sport because you don't choose how hard you play a game of soccer. You don't choose when David comes flying off the back fence and fucking slide tackles you. But you do choose how much weight goes on the bar. You do choose how many sets you do. And so that is why all forms of training, when people talk about the different risk versus reward, sure, there's different risk versus rewards fundamentally associated with all these activities. But you are just making such a quantum leap towards safety when you are training because of the degree of control we have over the environment. You know, even playing a game of soccer, there could be a ditch out on the field or something like that. Again, when it's training, you have time to go out and inspect the playing surface and environment and all those things. So I'm never that interested in having a risk versus reward conversation about any specific training modalities unless they're completely absurd. You're just, I don't know, giving yourself concussive blows to the head or something like that. But everything else, it's like we can make adaptations and we can become more resilient to it because we can control the dose at any given point in time. The things that I believe are genuinely risky are sport, chaotic environments, things where we're not in control of the intensity of our exercise. And I think people pay too much attention to the injury risk associated with that, and they just don't realize how controlled of a setting we're in, especially in the gym. Indoors, air-conditioned, pin-loaded machines. Sorry, you said Olympic lifts, but even that, like, higher velocity movement, jumping around with the barbell, you still like jumping around with a PVC pipe, you know, it really can start there if you're that worried about banging yourself up. Oh, and that's the other thing as well. I think the goal of life isn't to go through life not getting injured and to try and return your body in mint condition when you die. Like, we're here to use that thing at the end of the day. And I think as a society, we catastrophize this idea of injury a little bit too much. And so, you know, we're resilient. We can bounce back from things. Like it'll happen at some point, whether you're training or not. I mean, sedentary people just fall downstairs. You can break your wrist doing a heavy clean and jerk, or you can be a sedentary person who falls downstairs.
Don't you think that when it comes to the gym, 90% of injury prevention is volume and load management?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some people say, no, but I managed my load and things still didn't go my way. And that is a misunderstanding because we can acknowledge all the things that influence load, internal, external, training related, not training related. But we also have to acknowledge that we are not fully in control of all of these things that affect the load going through the system at any given point. So, I mean, I'm in control of the sets and the reps, how much load you potentially put on the bar or the intensity that you train at. I'm less in control of your boss keeping you up at night because he's given you a hectic work project. And that's what messes with my load management. And so this is why, like, one, you have to acknowledge your position in the totem pole, because if what we do is applying stress to a system to get in a controlled manner to get a desired outcome, but then we're like third down the rung when it comes to dosing and managing stress for our clients. So I look at it, it's either their family or their boss that's number one and number two. So there's for sure two people that are ahead of us in the totem pole. So if I'm writing these inflexible programs, I'm like, nah, F your boss, F your wife or your husband and your kids. I said 4x8 at RPE. No, it's like, no, that's, or if I'm stubborn about that, I'm not acknowledging finding the deliberate amount of stress that we're looking for on the system, because the system is in this constant state of flux. So we're always trying to hit a moving target with our precise dose of stress on the system, or this idea of load management. And there's so many things that we're not in control of. So a bit more of a reactive approach, implementing methods for auto-regulation that cushion our prediction errors. So I only map out my clients' training. I just take it 1 week at a time. But even me sitting there on a Sunday night thinking about what Johnny's going to squat on a Thursday, there's so many prediction errors that could come up between now and then. So that's why me using RPE-based prescription is a bit safer, because you can hit RPE 8 or 9 on the best or worst day of your life. It's just what that weight is for that RPE 8 or 9 might change, but they can still get the desired training intention for the workout. Again, you don't have to use RPE. You could give a percentage range. You're like, all right, if you're feeling good, I'd love for you to hit 95%. But if there's some other thing, you can give them a bad day option as well.
So if we were to try and prevent injuries, we have load and volume management, we have auto-regulation. So just like being sensible about it and not pushing it too hard on days when it just doesn't want to happen.
Yep.
We have sleep. What else? Are we leaving out anything?
And then doing your best to manage stress. How do you do that with your boss? It kind of is what it is. But then I think just like acknowledging that as well. Like even if you can't do anything about it, acknowledging it, it just makes you feel a bit better about it. Because I think it's expectation management is so much of it. There's your objective results. Are you getting better or worse? But then there's the subjective experience as well. You're like, well, given the circumstances, I'm just happy that I'm showing up right now and sort of doing what I can. So that's such a big part of it as well. But yeah, I would say as far as the things that you're in control of, always trying to be smart and somewhat precise with your dose of stress, training stress, and doing your best to control all those other aspects of it, but then mainly just giving yourself grace that so many of those things are uncontrollable. And that's it. When you look at a lot of where complex thinking is sort of moving us, it is sort of just away from wanting that certainty and just being open to things and more looking at just, again, managing this complex system and always trying to push it in the right direction. But it's not like a ship where we have a steering wheel and a gas pedal and a brake,
Yeah, there are so many random variables that we're trying to control that. Yeah. I might just be looking in the wrong places or missing like a big component of this, but why do I see so much lower body plyos, but not that much upper body plyos other than Olympic lifting itself?
So, great conversation. And there's a good reason for it when you look at the structure of the lower limb versus the upper limb. But then I think there's truth in what you're saying where it's like, no, it's. And so what the difference there being, we have much bigger tendon structures in the lower limb for the stretch shortening cycle, that store and release phenomenon. And we have a lot less of that in the upper limb. So it's mainly due to structural differences. And then we have to look at what the definition of a plyometric is. And this is the thing. I'm not saying that you have to stick to these. It's more just useful for telling you what the idea of the training concept is. But technically speaking, for something to be a plyometric activity, it's a landing preceded by a takeoff where your interaction with the ground is less than a quarter of a second. Johnny accountant that I get into doing some leaps, so I'm like, mate, just bounce up and down off the ground. They're for sure spending longer on the ground than that. So it is somewhat of an arbitrary definition because anyone who's just jumping up and down, if they're in contact with the ground for less than they were doing other activities, it's getting the desired outcome of that training stimulus. But then this idea that you could hurtle through the air, make contact with the ground with your upper limb first and bounce off the ground in less than a quarter of a second, it's just going to require a lot more physical qualities. Like the gymnastics, cheerleading, constant flipping, and cartwheels of where I've sort of played around with what I would call quasi-plyometric. Maybe that is genuinely plyometric. Again, landing preceded by a takeoff, only a quarter of a second on the ground. Maybe I got there with my cartwheels, but I don't even know about that. So what I end up doing is I don't think true plyometric training is that viable for the upper limb. I also think functionally or practically speaking, when we're expressing speed or power with the upper limb, it's rarely just the upper limb. A lot of the time it's a full body movement. So think about knocking someone out with a punch, throwing something as far as possible. We associate it with upper limb power, but all of that is coming from the ground up first. So even in scenarios where we are expressing power or speed through the upper limb, it tends to be facilitated by the lower body much more. And the same way arm swing and stuff helps with the lower body. But yeah, just a little bit more complicated in that regard. Having said that, what I don't like is you hear a lot of people saying, train the lower body like an athlete and then the upper body like a bodybuilder. I think that's ignoring some of the potential for high velocity training in the upper limb as well. It's like, no, we can move things faster, So why don't we just work on that? But practically it ends up being power or ballistic training more so than true plyometric training. And again, the main reason being the lack of really big tendons. Imagine if we had an Achilles tendon in the wrist. Oh my God, we'd throw a javelin 200 meters. Not me, but someone.
Do you need to go, or are you up for some personality questions?
No, please. I'm waking up now and I'm starting to feel better. So just to give everyone context listening, me and Dave both woke up with the sniffles today, but two dedicated content creators. So here we are. But no, yeah. So I woke up, not sense of dread talking to you because I like talking to you, but I was like, is my brain going to be able to answer these questions that he's going to cook up for me? But yeah, feeling good now. Let's do it.
Yeah, you did good. 3 dream dinner guests. If you could invite any 3 people to have ever lived to dinner, who would they be and why?
Because I've run through this in my head because I used to give different answers to this and I thought about like what they'd actually be like. And I'm like, fuck, some of these people that I think are legends, like, I don't know if they're dinner guests. Maybe like just have a beer, but like not the full blown dinner. Because I want to, actually no, Nassim Taleb would be hilarious. Like he's too funny of a writer. But yeah, Nassim Taleb would have to be one of them. I used to say Jaco Pastorius is my favorite bass player. So he established bass as a virtuoso instrument. But just when you hear a bit about his life, I don't know if he'd be good to chat to. So I'll go Pino Palladino, which is another legendary bass player who just did it all. He's such a motherfucker. Like bass is not an instrument you want to hear a lot of in the charts. Like so many times I'm a bass player, FYI. A lot of the time as a bass player, you're just there to be in the background. And if you get busy, a lot of the time in the recording studio, the producer will hit the button and be like, mate, you don't make number 1 tracks with a fucking bass line. Can you shut the hell up so we can hear the vocals and stuff like that? Just do your job. But Pino was such a motherfucker. He was getting busy. He was doing all these crazy melodies and just shit that you would never get away with making pop songs and things like that, or pop songs, rock songs. Pino has played with everyone. So him.
But bass is the heart of everything. They're just trying to quieten it, but it is the heart.
Yeah, exactly. It's the unsung hero. And then one other person. I'll go Pythagoras. You got to get an ancient Greek in there. Because he is someone who was tremendously impactful on the field of mathematics and music. And I think one of the things that frustrates me about the evidence-based era and looking at what we do as purely a science, I think it's equal parts art and science. And I think all of a sudden your decision-making and your reasoning gets so much clearer when you view what we do as both the objective and the subjective intertwined. Because, again, whether it's music, which, again, a lot of people, I mean, when you really understand music, we understand that it is equal parts objectivity and subjectivity. There are just certain notes that objectively go together, but sometimes people play the notes that are meant to sound bad and it just tickles us in the perfect way. The same way that, like, cooking, not that Pythagoras was a cook, that's why I like Marco Pierre White, who might be my other dinner guest if he doesn't tell everyone to get fucked, because, again, we know that food science is a thing. Just objectively, certain ingredients light up certain parts of your palate, but you would never serve your mum up chicken soup and be like, this is the best chicken soup anyone could ever eat. You'd be like, I know that this is good enough. Is this to your taste? Does it need a bit more salt? Do you put a few more noodles in there? It's just sort of anyone who can sophisticatedly mingle with the objective and the subjective, I'm interested in having conversations with.
I'm not sure if you know that I have like 15 years of classical guitar experience as well. I was in top 20 in Hungary for like 15 years.
Okay. No, this is explaining a lot though. You know, I'm not good at music. I like music. Yeah. So you're an actual shredder. I was just around good musicians and like had a taste for it. But my technical ability is, I don't want to say astoundingly poor, but like I'm probably the worst musician that was in a semi-successful band. I was just the guy who wasn't afraid to send an email or like call a venue.
I think competitive and music shouldn't exist together. So as long as you're enjoying what you're doing, I think that's perfect.
Yeah. True.
3 favorite things about yourself.
3. Okay. So like definitely that I just have a crack at things. I can endure things and I think I'm a funny person. I hate it when people say that they're funny, but it's definitely like whenever someone says like, oh, you make me laugh, I think that's one of the best compliments I could receive.
I agree that you're funny, but also I didn't follow you for the first year because your fucking Instagram page said comedian. And I was like, who is this guy?
I never know how much people pay attention to those things. So Because some
And
people
you,
I think have been really thrown by that.
With this thick lip filter as well on your stories. I'm like, he might be making sense, but this is too much.
It's just for my own sanity. It's just because I flip on either side of this. Like I take this very seriously. I've dedicated my whole life to it, but then I always try to remind myself that it's like, it's just training, it's just lifting weights. It's just, I see both sides of it. Like, yes, this is super serious. This is my entire passion in life. But then, I try to not. I've just seen it break a lot of people who can't see the lighter side in sort of what we all do for a living.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing to filter them out.
Yeah, it's that duality, right? Like, because I sort of see it in you. Like, you sort of like take the piss a lot, but then no, you're like, oh, I am here to get people value for their money and to change. Like, it is that duality.
A book that everyone should read.
I'm just going to give, it's a stereotypical answer from me for a reason. Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. It spoke to my soul. So many of the other ideas and ways of systems thinking that I've been introduced since digesting that book are really, that book still just encapsulates all of it for me. And if there was an introductory text that's going to move people away from certainty and getting people comfortable decision making in uncertain circumstances, and just for an intro into moving away from simple cause and effect reasoning and embracing truly complex thinking, there's just no better book, in my opinion.
I think it's an interesting concept how if you learn enough on fitness, you can start reading books in other disciplines and draw conclusions and apply it to fitness.
That is the only principle-driven approach, in my opinion. Like, what does Musashi say? Know the way broadly, and you shall see it in all things. And you will see it
in all things.
And it really is that, Like, when you're principle-driven, you should be able to read books on music, books on cooking, books on economics in particular, and be like, oh my God, these guys are not personal trainers, but they could be great personal trainers. Like, I know all of the people I look up to, like I know Pino Palladino, he would get it. He'd be like, nah, fuck all this optimal shit. Like, this is your journey, man. Like, 100%. Marco Pierre White, he'd write up a sick program with all just the big rocks covered, but he'd email it to you before, about what do you reckon about this? Is this seasoned to your taste?
Yeah. Amazing. Do you have a favorite exercise in the gym?
Yeah, any variation cleans off blocks. It's such a gunshot of a movement. I love it because so in weightlifting, you're sort of meant to be relatively controlled and then explode towards the end of the pull. So with block cleans, you just cut out that first part where you have to be controlled. It's like, just rip it, man.
What's your favorite quote?
I'll probably think of a great one after this, but I don't want to drop the Musashi one again. Hold on.
I know you like the Marshall McLuhan one.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Which one? Okay, yeah, I'll give you two. Yeah, you're right. How did I think of that? You know me well. Okay, so Marshall McLuhan is someone who's been really influential on me. He was the OG like media theorist, and I studied journalism at uni. But Marshall McLuhan has two really profound quotes to me. First one is, the medium is the message. It does relate to training, but it more relates to communication. And it's just this idea that whatever platform you use to communicate, it is going to fundamentally shape your message. And there's sort of a game that you're playing there. It's not just what you're trying to say. It's the instrument through which you're using to communicate that idea. It fundamentally colors it and constrains it. And where that's been impactful for me in so many different ways. But I think like the clearest example is you get so many people trying to make short form content. And it's like, have you not seen like what this app is for? Like, do you understand like how the app wants you to communicate? And they just try to ignore that. And they're like, oh, why doesn't the algorithm like me? It's like, you just completely ignored everything that this platform was trying to tell you in terms of how to send a message. But then Marshall McLuhan has this other quote that's a bit less well known, and I think it's even better. And it's, there are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew. And I'm pretty sure what he meant by that is, I mean, it's semi sort of obvious, but Marshall McLuhan, there was a lot of rumors about his lifestyle and he got persecuted for a couple of things. And I think historically we've gone through the world just not listening to certain demographics of people and just ignoring people who had brilliant ideas because of who they were or what they were, and not judging them on just like the merits of their ideas. And how much have we limited the trajectory of our society by just only listening to certain segments of society? But even further to that, like looking at the fitness industry, I just think there's so many trainers. They're like, oh, who am I to put out content? Who am I to sort of push myself and try to influence other people positively? And I just think it's like, yeah, so many people are just happy to be passengers in this industry, and they don't sort of feel like they're in a position to impact it on a greater level. It's like, no, like this thing's too small, man. We can't afford to not all be putting ourselves out there and putting our best ideas out there. We're all crew, so act accordingly.
I think about all this in a much more nasty way, because there's so much like toxicity in the fitness space. There's some people like Joel Seedman and Squat University are so hated, and yet it's a zero-sum game. An Instagram feed is a zero-sum game. If you put out content, you push out other people. So why wouldn't you do your best to take their lunch?
That's exactly what it is. It's like, because a lot of people say, but no, but the charlatans should just stop posting. They're not gonna. So once we acknowledge that, what are you going to do? And it's exactly as you said, you take up your space in the feed every day. And you're like, no, but like I can't put out the best piece of content every day. I'm like, can you put out something better than them? Because again, the Instagram app doesn't like them necessarily. It likes people who post every day at a reliable time. Because just think about what the app's trying to do, what the algorithm wants. It's like, mate, trying to keep people on the app, and you post 2 times a week at random times. How the hell am I meant to keep people on the app like that? Meanwhile, the Seedman, the Squat U, Carnivore MD, giving him notice, be like, I'm scheduling a post for 3 hours by now. Please pop it into the algorithm at your convenience. Instagram's like, yep.
Yeah, I'm terrible at being consistent with short form, but I think I'm falling in love with long form thanks to you. So I'm very consistent with newsletter, consistent with the podcast for now, YouTube. Last question, day in your life 5 years from now.
Ooh, could be at an interesting intersection there. I mean, hopefully I'm living 400 meters that way is where my dream house is. I hope it comes up.
Didn't you just move to your favorite beach or something?
Yeah, but I'm renting. So I don't own this apartment, but there's a little cottage with a white picket fence, stained glass windows. And I'm about 100 meters from the beach. This one's 40 meters. Like, it's just that little bit closer. But yeah, so I love my 2-bedroom apartment. It's just me here. So I've got the office, I've got the bedroom. Well, it's the living room's the office, actually. The other bedroom's just for storing surfboards and sports equipment. But I want to start a family at some point, and we'll own a nice house, white picket fence, a little bit closer to the beach. But as far as the work side of things, would like it just to go exactly as it is. Actually, you know what? In 5 years, maybe I'll be back into a bit of face-to-face training. That's definitely something that I miss. I only really get to train people face-to-face at seminars and things like that. But I'd like to think in 5 years, traveling schedules slow down a little bit, maybe bringing in a family into the world, and then, just train a few more people face-to-face. But other than that, just hope I get my surf in every day.
And you're really good at face-to-face training as well, based on what I experienced. Who are you hoping to train then?
Man, I just like training just people. Just, yeah. Because that's the most meaningful. Like, I've worked with pro athletes and Olympians and stuff, and it's kind of stressful. It's like, I mean, this person could do it with or without me. It's so good, the gen pop and stuff, but all the biggest impacts I've had, it's not fucking taking someone from like a 220 to a 225 kilo squat. It's taking someone who identifies as a weak person and like turning them into a bit of a weapon. Where like, I remember I had one of my clients who just like, he had pretty bad genetics and he trained really hard and he invested a lot in me. And he trained with me for like 5 years. And I just remember towards the end of it, he's like, man, like I was training in here the other day and I was like, I'm the strongest guy in the gym. And I was like, yeah, like, cause that's not much. Like if you fucking go for it, like you can be on the right day. Like there can always be someone who walks in, ruins your day, right? There's a lot of strong, big people out there, but that's the kind of stuff that gets me G'd up. Cause that's why I do this. Cause I used to feel he's weak and I lift weights now that aren't impressive to a lot of people. That if I could go back and tell young Angus that that's what I was lifting, I'd faint.
Yeah, those are some life changed. Those are the best ones. Where can people find you?
Check out the socials, Angus Bradley 92. You you can find everything else through that. I'm putting out YouTube videos, putting out podcasts and everything, but sort of you can get onto it just through the old Instagram.
This was awesome. Thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, mate, thank you. Really good. Done a lot of podcasts this week. This is a breath of fresh air. I mean, I knew it would be because you're smart. Yeah, this was awesome.